Hyvää iltaa. Tervetuloa tähän luonnonfilosofian seuran järjestämään tiistaihin luentotilaisuuteen. Tänään meillä on puhujina Alexander ja Fingelkurts. He ovat filosofian tohtoreita ja ovat tietoisuuden tutkijoita. He ovat toimineet monissa tutkimuslaitoksissa johtavina tutkijoina, viimeksi laitoksessa BM Science, Pain and Mind Technologies Research Center täällä Suomessa. He ovat julkaisseet pitkälti yli 100 vertaisarvioitua julkaisua aikakauslehdissä ja konferenssijulkaisuissa tältä alalta, tietoisuuden tutkimisen alalta. Tänään aiheena on How does conscious connected rating influence the contents of self-experience? Ja olkaa hyvä.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting us to present our research. And in the frame of this talk, I will actually present you very novel data, which only recently were submitted for publication. So you will be the first people who actually will see the results. And I will speak about actually altered states of self-consciousness, which is induced by conscious connected breathing. And I would like to start with a very simple and brief rationale for this research. That it is the fact that altered state of consciousness were very much in the interest of many scholars and researchers for many centuries across various disciplines, from philosophy to psychology, and only recently actually neuroscience started paying attention. But if we look carefully and analyze the subjective introspective reports about altered states of consciousness, then we clearly see that the sense of self is actually in the center of these subjective reports. So whatever phenomenology evolving during the altered states of consciousness, it invariably involves the alteration, and primarily actually involves alteration of self-consciousness. And these alterations may include some of these, maybe even more phenomenological features like disembodiment or out-of-body experience, fragmentation or dissolution of self, anomalies in self-reflective thought and narrative, a sense of timelessness, and the deconstruction of autobiographical history. So if it so that self is in the center of the phenomenological changes during altered state of consciousness, then of course we need to look at self to understand better what is it altered state of consciousness. But here there is a challenge that most of the studies of self-consciousness, they actually consider it as a singular, monolithic, static phenomenon, or they equate self-consciousness only with one aspect of it. As for example, minimal self, narrative self, bodily self. But here there is a problem, that if we oversimplify the concept of self to its monolithic kind of nature, or to only one component of self, then it is very difficult to explain or describe the whole phenomenology which actually evolves during different states, not necessarily even altered states, normal states, but of course during the altered states of consciousness, but also in the different pathological conditions which involve self-alterations, like for example schizophrenia or depersonalization disorder. Actually, if you take any mental disorder, it actually involves the changes in self-consciousness primarily to all other symptoms. So considering this, a more productive approach would be to conceptualize selfhood as a dynamic, multi-component phenomenon where self is a complex pattern emerging from the combination of different features and qualities which constitute selfhood, but none of which by itself is actually entirely sufficient or specific to selfhood, but only together they constitute self. So the question is, do we have any model which considers this dynamic, multi-component nature of selfhood? And apparently, yes. Recently, a neurophysiological three-dimensional model for experiential selfhood has been proposed. And according to this model, because it's neurophysiological, it involves both domains, phenomenological, so how subjective experience evolves and what actually is the content of subjectivity, but also neurophysiological. What are the neurophysiological changes which accompany these phenomenological alterations or phenomenological dynamics? So according to this model, the three specific subnets of the so-called self-referential brain network, they are responsible for manifestation of three phenomenological aspects of selfhood. So more specifically, for example, the anterior operational module, it's like subnet in this self-referential network of the brain, is responsible for the witnessing observer, or like in a short way to say, in a self, but self in a very narrow sense. This self can be without feeling of embodiment. It can be even without rational thought, but it's kind of some certitude which constantly observes and witnessing things happening. The right posterior operational module, or the subnetwork in this self-referential network, is responsible for the embodiment and emotional agency, or in short, me, because you can describe this like my body, my emotional feeling. And the left posterior operational module, or subnet in this self-referential brain network, is responsible for reflective agency, for thinking and reflecting about oneself, for the autobiographical memory, so it's past and future which is related to oneself. So in short, it is labeled as I. You may wonder, but why these kind of three operational modules or subnets in the self-referential brain network? Why not others? Are they chosen arbitrarily? No, they were not chosen arbitrarily. They emerged through the experimental studies where these three operational modules emerge as very stable and highly synchronized within each other. So they are very integrated. Independently, what subject is confronted, independently on the task which subject need to execute. There are a lot of different modules which are very dynamic and specific to this task which subject is doing or forced to do in the experiment. But these three operational modules, they are very stable and very dynamic. And they have the highest internal synchronicity within themselves if you compare with any other possible synchronicity patterns in the brain. So together these three modules which are shown here in blue, they simultaneously engage in the construction of phenomenal sense of selfhood, which is shown here in purple. So now I will dedicate the next slide to explain a little bit how actually these operational modules emerged, how they are revealed through the analysis of brain activity. So if we take one of these operational modules as an example, it contains three locations, which are marked here according to the international system for the recording of brain activity, which is electroencephalogram. So these three electrodes, they record the electrical activity during certain task or during certain state of pathological conditions. Then applying a particular mathematical algorithms, it is possible to decompose this continuous signal in so-called sequence of quasi-stationary segments. There is particular literature, theoretical and also experimental, which shows that every of these quasi-stationary segments is in fact as a reflection of a single operation which is produced by the neuronal ensemble which is located under particular electrode. And these segments, they are framed by the rapid transitional processes, or RTP in short, which are the boundaries of these segments. But in fact, it is a very abrupt jump in the amplitude of the signal. So then the second phase is to estimate the synchronicity of these boundaries between the three electrodes or three locations at the same time. So this synchronization would mean that these segments synchronized, and we already know that these segments, they are responsible for the operations. So this would mean that neuronal ensembles which are located in different spatial places, they synchronize in their activity, their operations, to execute more complex operation on the other temporal scale. So then we can estimate how often this synchronization between the RTPs happening during certain evaluation of the experiment. And using particular mathematics, we can estimate the strength of the synchrony within every of these operational modules. So summarizing, we can say that here we have functional integration within this operational module, which is increases or decreases. So the increase in synchrony within operational module will reflect the increase of functional integrity of this operational module, and it would indicate a stronger coordination among the involved neuronal ensembles, which in the context of this concept of selfhood triumvirate, because we have three modules which are responsible for the three major phenomenological components of self-consciousness, they will be more integrated, or it will be a more unified sense either of self-reflection or embodiment or witness and observer. On the contrary, if we see a reduction in the synchrony within the operational modules, this would reflect a weaker coordination, which would suggest that the functions which are supported by the particular operational module, either it is a witness and observation or embodiment or narration, they are, of course, less prominently expressed. So you may ask, well, it sounds plausible, but is it really so? And indeed, to answer this question, already many years ago, we organized a study where we tried to see what is the causal relation between the phenomenology of this phenomenological aspect of selfhood and the functional integrity of the operational modules, which are supposed to represent those phenomenological aspects. So in that study, we recruit meditators who are so-called professional meditators, meaning that they meditate every day for, on average, 30, 40 years. So why we choose these people? Because through this very long-term and consistent meditation practice, they learn to manipulate their subjective experience at will. So it is one plus for us scientists to use them as experimental subjects. And another important characteristic of such meditators is that because of their long exposure to alterations and changes in their mental world during meditation and different stages of meditation, they notice very subtle nuances of these changes, and also they learn how not to miss those changes, and also they develop a language which can precisely describe those changes, which again extremely important for us scientists, because if you ask just average person to describe even not the altered state of consciousness, but just normal subjective experience, in many cases people say 1-2 words and that's it. There is no rich picture. But we know that the electrical signal of the brain extremely rich. So how we can then correlate one with another if one part of this narrow phenomenology rich and another description is very poor? But in case of this kind of professional meditators or experienced meditators with a long history of meditation, they can describe very richly what they are experiencing. And then we have very diverse material to correlate with the electrophysiological parameters. So in that study, these meditators, they were instructed voluntary, but in a controlled laboratory conditions, to either up-regulate or down-regulate every of these aspects which we are interested in selfhood, triumvirate, either witness and observer, self, or embodiment, me, or the self-narration and self-reflection, I. One at a time manner. And every time, what results show, every time these meditators upregulate the sense of witnessing or embodiment or self-reflection, the functional integrity of a corresponding operational module increases. And every time they down-regulate one of these phenomenological features, purely by their mental will, the functional integrity of the corresponding operational module decreases. And because they also rank their own experience, so how they feel that they achieve the task. So then we had rankings, which we can correlate with the strength of functional integrity in every of these operational modules. And we show that there is a really strong correlation between the subjective description of either upregulation or downregulation and the functional integrity of the corresponding operational module. So this gives us a clear indication that there is a functional and functional causality between these two domains, phenomenological and subjective, phenomenological and neurophysiological, what concerns these three operational modules, which we measure through the electrical activity of the brain, and the three phenomenological features. So now we have a tool which we can use to study changes of the self-consciousness in different conditions, states, or psychopathology. But here there is another challenge, that most of the existing scientific research actually focuses on the short term, or so-called acute altered states. And indeed, we also, when we apply first this Selfhood triumvirate model to very brief episodes of altered states of selfhood, we indeed saw the alterations in these three components of selfhood estimated by three modules of self-referential network. But at the same time, the briefness of these altered changed states preclude the studying of the dynamics of selfhood components as a function of temporal involvement during a prolonged altered state. At the same time, the prolonged altered states, they would allow complex dynamics to unfold over time, and this would give us opportunity to observe how self-awareness actually evolves and transforms during these long states of altered states of consciousness in a ways that shorter states would never reveal, because they are very short. So to address this gap in this particular study, our aim was to investigate the temporal dynamics of the integrity of the three operational modules, which corresponds to the three components of selfhood, self, me, and I, by tracking their evolution during the prolonged altered states of consciousness. And as a non-pharmacological induction method to induce the prolonged states of altered states of selfhood, we used the controlled breathing practice, conscious connected breathing. Why we choose this particular technique? Because there are different ways how to breathe, and we know also from traditional methods of the East that there are plenty of different methods during meditation or yoga practices. They're all different techniques. But why conscious connected breathing? Because empirical findings suggest that conscious connected breathing can evolve mystical experiences, which are actually comparable to those which can be induced by the psychedelics, such as, for example, psilocybin, and particularly the states of ego dissolution, oceanic boundaryless, and transcendence of space and time. So during this experiment, the participants lay on the mat on their back with their head on the small pillow, wearing electrodes during the whole procedure. So here I will show you the design of the study. So before the experimental session, the subjects fill in their consent and registration forms, and also they fill in the online demographic health questionnaire, which helps us to understand how homogeneous our sample of subjects is, and also to understand if they comply with inclusion and exclusion criteria, because if they have, for example, some brain traumas or some epileptic disorder, they of course need to be excluded, and for that we need to have this information. So after that, the experimental session starts, and it starts with the 6 minutes of baseline, when subjects just lay on their back, doing nothing, being in their normal wakefulness state, and EEG was recorded. After that, they reply on 9 standardized psychometric questionnaires, where they need to rank their subjective experiences during this normal resting baseline state. After they finish replying on the questionnaires, the conscious connected breathing session starts, which lasts 60 minutes, and it contains several chronologically ordered phases. During all these 60 minutes, EEG was recorded. After the conscious connected breathing terminated, subjects were required immediately provide their introspective report, where they, in their own words, describe what actually happened with them subjectively. And they were guided to be immersed in their experience with a focus on different phases, so that we can actually later understand and correlate EEG recording with different phases of conscious connected breathing. After the report was finished, they again reply on 9 standardized questionnaires, the same as here, but this time they rank their subjective experiences during conscious connected breathing. So then all the data were analyzed. So initially we recruit 18 subjects, but 4 subjects were excluded for different reasons, because they were not complying with the inclusion criteria. So the final number in the study was 14, among which were 3 females and 11 males. So all in all, we have 19 hours of EEG recording and 11 questionnaires per subject. And among these questionnaires were the standardized altered state of consciousness scale and another standardized questionnaire of mystical experience. So having all this data, we got the results. And this project was the combination and coordination between several organizations and 5 research members. So since the altered state of consciousness was our main target, so this was actually our first question. If this conscious connected breathing really induce altered state of consciousness in our sample of subjects, in literature we know that this procedure indeed induces, but what about our subjects? So here we have results of the so-called altered states of consciousness scale, which evaluate global altered state of consciousness, which is shown here, which is composite score of 11 phenomenological domains. So what we saw, that conscious connected breathing indeed induce very strong altered state of consciousness, which was much higher than both minimums, And the rest condition actually did not induce practically any reasonable score. This score was non-distinguishable from the theoretical minimum and was lower than empirical. So theoretical minimum is basically a 0 because it represents a normal waking consciousness of an individual from the theoretical point of view. Naturally, theoretically, we should not experience any alterations in our consciousness, everyday experience. But the empirical minimum was determined based on data from 135 healthy subjects, all in state of normal waking consciousness, and this was done by the authors who actually developed this questionnaire. But this is a composite score. If we look on the 11 dimensions, then again we see that during conscious connected breathing, which is this dark blue, all the scores were much higher than during the rest condition. In rest condition, they all lay within these two empirical minimums. So basically, it is normal, everyday waking consciousness. But conscious connected breathing indeed involve drastic alterations in the self-consciousness. The strongest were the blissful state, the disembodiment, and the experience of unity. So this is a grand average for all participants. Okay, but this is also a state of consciousness. What about mystical experience? Maybe they did not reach any reasonable mystical experience using this breathing technique. So this is the result for the mystic experience. So again, here we have the overall intensity of mystical experience evaluated by the mystical experience questionnaire. And again, we see that during conscious connected breathing, participants got, on average, for this cohort, very high percentage of the score, 60%, which is according to the authors who developed this questionnaire, means that they reach total mystical experience. And in the resting condition, which is baseline, they actually did not reach any reasonable score at all. But we also pull together 32 phenomenological dimensions from all these 9 standardized questionnaires to see how these different dimensions changes during the conscious connected breathing. So this is presented on this graph, and this graph is a percent change from the baseline. So baseline here 0. Everything what is going up means that during conscious connected breathing, particular phenomenological experience was increased, and everything what is going down naturally decreased. There are 3 color codes here: blue, orangish, and green. They correspond to these 3 operational modules and responsible for 3 phenomenological features, aspects of self-consciousness. So this one corresponds to the self, in a narrow sense, witnessing observer. Oranges correspond to the embodiment, or me, and green to the self-narration, self-reflection, or I. So one can see that this is a percentage change. One can see that the strongest changes were for the witnessing observer, and they include like internal and external unity, ego dissolution, ineffability, like difficult to explain in words, mystical experience. At the same time, what concerns the embodiment, we can see that physical agency, body ownership, self-location, body image, they all decrease. Even though it looks like small, but it is like around 100%. So it's really a lot. Body orientation, and at the same time, positive mood increases. And we, from the literature, also from the psychophysiology, I'm sorry, know that body feelings, embodiment, actually strongly related with emotional feelings. For example, depressed people, they feel their body very strongly. They feel their like blood running in their veins, which we in normal state usually do not feel. So their sense of their body increases. But here we see that positive mood increased. But at the same time, the logical thought and their self-reflection and autobiographical memory was decreasing, because we experience of future, experience of past, all of them decrease, experience of thought continuity decreases, rumination decreases. But at the same time, we observe the ego inflation and noetic quality, both of them increases. And later we will return to this fact, because it's not immediately intuitive. So, okay, but all what I show you up to now, it is about the phenomenology, phenomenological part. What about electrophysiology? Since our experiment is in the framework of the narrow phenomenology. So here we have the results. Attention, this is grand average for all participants, and this graph contains two panels. Panel R represents the conscious connected breathing session as a whole, and panel B shows the chronological dynamics for every of these components. Blue, which is self, here you see where this operational module in the brain is located. The orange, me, which is located in the posterior right area, and the green, I, which is located in left posterior area. So what we saw, again, all these results is a % change from the baseline. So what we saw electrophysiologically, we saw that functional integrity of all three modules decreased significantly during the whole session. So witness and observer, the strongest decrease, embodiment decrease, so meaning that there was certain level of disembodiment, and the narrative thought, logical thought decreased also. But if we look on the dynamics, then we can clearly see that all three, that functional integrity of all three operational modules decrease only in the first charge phase. Later, there was certain nuances. While, for example, witness and observer continues to be lower than during the baseline state, for example, the embodiment increases in the integration phase, and there was also certain dynamics in the I component. So this shows us that the average picture for the whole session does not show what actually going on during this 1 hour. There is certain evolvement electrophysiologically, and it mirrors quite nicely the subjective reports of the participants, to which I will return later. So again, this is grand average, but when we look here on the overall mystical experience in our participants, we notice that, of course, this 60%, it's a grand average for all participants. But some of them were lower, reach low levels, and some of them reach much higher. So then we stratified our group on two subgroups. Those whose mystical experience questionnaire score was 60 and above. According to the authors, this means that they reach complete mystical experience. And another subgroup, those who reach below 60, meaning that they reach only partial mystical experience. So then we'll look how the expression of mystical experience related to altered state of consciousness in these two groups. So this dark blue, it's subgroup which reach 60% or more, meaning that they reach complete mystical experience. And light blue, it's a subgroup with a partial mystical experience. So it is clear that the stronger mystical experience is, the stronger altered state of consciousness is. And the lower mystical experience is, even though it is above, still much above normal resting state, you see above empirical minimum, the lower is the altered state of consciousness. So these two are related. And if we look, but this is composite score, but again, if we look on these 11 dimensions, again, for the complete mystical experience, which is dark blue, we clearly see that expression of all those phenomenological sensations and feelings were stronger than for the partial mystical experience. So from this phenomenological data, we see that there is a kind of linear progression, that complete mystical experience, it's more the same alterations which were present during partial mystical experience. But what actually neurophysiology tells us? Is it really so that it is just a matter of levels? It's a little bit less, a little bit more. So here we have a picture for the partial mystical experience. Again, this is a illustration of the whole session, and this is the dynamics during the session and different chronological phases. So here we see that again, if we characterize the session as a whole, there is decrease in the functional integrity in all three operational modules. But this time it is not the module which is responsible for witness and observer decrease the most. It is actually the self-reflection and self-narrative. And again, if you look on the dynamics, yes, this module was always lower than in the resting state. But, for example, embodiment again shows increase during the integration phase. And there was certain dynamics also quite different for the witness and observer. So this is partial mystical experience, and now compare with the complete mystical experience. From the phenomenological data, we should expect that these values should just get even lower, but in the same direction, all of them, because in the phenomenological expression, the stronger mystical experience, the stronger is the same change in the same direction in the phenomenological features. But electrophysiological data shows a completely different picture. The whole session characterized by these dynamics, the self is the strongest decrease, and then surprisingly, in a complete mystical experience, there is a lot of thought, which, if you remember, in one of the phenomenological dimensions there is this infallibility, very difficult to express in thought. And if you read reports, they very often tell that that the thought kind of was absent. So this is kind of strange. And if you look on the dynamics, you also see that there is a certain evolvement which is different from the partial mystical experience. So electrophysiologically, we could not say that complete mystical experience is just more pronounced change, but in the same direction as the partial mystical experience, because it is completely different. So this means that these two states, they are different states qualitatively and quantitatively. And of course, in this data, there are a lot of nuances to discuss, but we do not have time, and it will be too complicated. So I would like to focus only on two main phenomena. If you pay attention on this first charge phase, this is partial mystical experience, one subgroup, and this is complete mystical experience, another subgroup. This is the only phase where all three operational modules show decrease in their functional integrity. So this is quite curious. Why not in some other? So this is one of the findings which I would like to discuss with you. And in other, it is this enlargement during the complete mystical experience. Increase in the functional integrity in the I module, which is quite counterintuitive. But let's start with this charge. So we are focusing on charge phase. So a pronounced decrease in the functional integrity across all three operational modules of the self-referential network was evident exclusively during the charge phase. And this neurophysiological disruption was very nicely mirrored by the subjective reports of the subjects. So they all spoke about diminished observant agency, which is in our case linked to self aspect, and then linked to the operational module which is responsible for self aspect. And in the words of the participants, they express it this way: I went into a total state of nothingness, nothing to observe. That was a very quick change, little observation. Then they also described that their experience of disembodiment and suspended temporal awareness. This is associated with the me aspect, which is connected with the operational module, which is responsible for the me. In the words of the participants, total detachment from my body, could not feel my body at all. The body started to feel like energy that expands into the space. The understanding of time disappeared. And then they also report the reduced reflective thinking and inner speech, which is correlated with the diminished aspect and naturally diminished functional integrity of the operational module, which is responsible for the I aspects. In the words of the participants, no thoughts and reflections. Thinking collapsed away from the daily thoughts. All understanding and thoughts were gone. So we propose the following explanations. Why during the charge phase all of three drop significantly, phenomenologically and also neurophysiologically. So our explanation is that the charge phase may represent a neurophysiological destabilization window during which the abrupt onset of quite unusual breathing pattern, because we do not breathe in everyday our normal state in this particular way. So this brings the activation of sympathetic nervous system, which disrupts the homeostatic balance between cortical and subcortical networks. And these destabilizations brings transitory suppression of the integrative functions within the self-referential network, meaning that different brain areas which constitute this self-referential network, they start to work more independently of each other, less integrating their activity. And because of that, we saw that the functional integrity of these operational modules become weaker, and naturally the phenomenological sense of corresponding aspects of selfhood also decreases. And now let's focus on this mysterious increase in the I module, which is related to the reflective thinking, which was evident exclusively during the complete mystical experience. So it is really counterintuitive, because mystical experiences are traditionally associated with the difficulty of expressing anything in thoughts, and usually subjects do not report their thoughts. So we come out with the following logic. Maybe you would have some other way to explain, but this is what comes to our mind. That this profound nature of complete mystical experience often evokes unusual senses like awe and deep feeling of connectedness to something much greater than the self, and this usually accompanied by noetic quality that may foster ego inflation. And if you remember one of these 32 dimensions, the ego inflation was increased also quite significantly. And what does it mean, ego inflation? It is a sense of spiritual exaltation, bliss, nobility, and supreme value. All these features, they require actually self-reflection, require meta-reflection about oneself. So paradoxically, the very realization of this profound nature of mystical experience may provoke a strong drive to conceptualize it for oneself. But here is the problem. If you remember, the witness and observer module decreased very much. So it is not possible to narrate even for oneself or self-reflect properly if there is no stable witness and observational agency. This is why there is this automatic urge from the brain to rationalize. It's an automatic function, but it is inhibited by the lack of the stable witness and observation agency. And this only amplifies the feeling that there is a noetic quality of my experience, that there is a sense of intuitive insight, because I could not construct logical explanation. I just get the knowledge or some insight. So this is how we try to explain why this I aspect, which is responsible for self-reflection, actually increased during the complete mystical experience. And if we look here, everyone who or many groups who study, for example, psychedelics and mystical experiences during psychedelics, they use the same questionnaire, these 11 dimensions, to study it. And when because we are familiar with the literature and with those results, and when we got our results in conscious connected breathing, for us it resembles very much the result from the psychedelic data. But to analyze it properly, we look at the so-called altered states database. It is a database where researchers who already did research and published this data, they put in this database these profiles of these 11 dimensions. So this is why it is possible to compare statistically how they are correlated between your own data and data from this database. This database contains many different psychedelics, but also different techniques, not only pharmacological substances. So I want to show you that our analysis revealed that among different psychedelic compounds which are reported in this altered state database, only psilocybin administered with these particular dosages produced this phenomenological profile which was statistically similar to the one which we got in our conscious connected breathing session study. So across both interventions, the highest sum score was consistently observed in the dimension oceanic boundless, which is traditionally considered a defining aspect of any altered state of consciousness. This was followed by the intermediate score of the visionary restructuralization, and the lowest score was for the dread of ego dissolution. So it's actually this depressive kind of states and so on. So we can conclude that this resemblance suggests that conscious connected breath work and also psilocybin administration may engage comparable neuropsychological mechanisms, which is responsible for their capacity to promote psychological well-being and mental health. And indeed, both interventions was shown to have a therapeutical potential for different symptoms like anxiety, tension, or depression. So I would like to conclude with the following, that this study presents the first neurophenomenological account of the temporal dynamics of the selfhood triumvirate components during a prolonged altered states of selfhood induced by conscious connected breathing. By emphasizing the temporal dimension, we were able to disentangle how neurophenomenology unfolds over time, offering a more nuanced understanding of the interplay among these three components of the selfhood during long-lasting altered states of consciousness. Also, specifically, complete and partial mystical experiences were associated with distinct neurophenomenological profiles with their unique dynamics of the functional integrity of the operational modules, which were closely mirrored by the participants' introspective reports. And also the similarity of the conscious connected breathwork and the psilocybin effect suggests that conscious connected breathing can be a safer way to achieve quite similar effect as a psychedelic compound. And I would like to finish with a few philosophical and ethical implications. Maybe you will find more, but we come out with these ones. So the first one is that our findings support a view that selfhood is not a monolithic and static entity, but rather a temporally dynamic, multi-component and mobile and modifiable phenomenon. Also, our findings, they recast mystical experience not as a simple erasure of selfhood, but rather as a complex reconfiguration of how the self relates to its own limits, its body, and its world. The tight coupling between operational modules dynamics and the detailed description of the reports which were produced by the participants constitutes the mutual constraint which is ideal for neurophenomenology, because neither neural data by themselves nor phenomenology alone would provide the same level of conceptual refinement. Ethically, if conscious connected breathing can reliably induce deep altered state of consciousness and mystical-like states, then access to radical self-modulation no longer depends on pharmacology. And this raises a question about how societies should regulate, ritualize, and educate around these aspects. Also, if selfhood is plastic and modifiable through such accessible for everyone practice as conscious connected breathing, then individuals and communities bear responsibility for how they sculpt their own patterns of self-relation, either towards a greater openness, maybe humility, compassion and realism, or towards escapism and inflation. Remember, ego inflation still grows during conscious connected breathing, and also we know that it is growth during the psychedelic experimentation. So there is a risk here that people may get kind of, even though in media we more often hear about ego dissolution, but this is a little bit different from ego inflation, different aspect. Okay, so by this I would like to finish my talk, and I would be glad to clarify or reply to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander and Andrew, about this interesting presentation about neurophenomenology and related aspects. As you probably said, are there some questions in the auditorium, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much for fascinating presentation. Although I didn't get everything, all information, but a lot of information I understood, really. I have actually two questions or comments, whether you however you would like to see them. The first is that this is something very different from conventional science, to combine phenomenological approach and neurophysiological approach. And my question is, how do you think about the methodological discrepancies of these two parts? As the phenomenological part is only relying on the language, on the words, and the other part is not related to the words as such. Maybe you would like to reflect on the methodological challenges, I would say. And another thing is that somehow you are in your conclusions discussing about the health and well-being paradigm in general, and proposing that this kind of breathing exercises might be one way of promoting health among the whole population. This is very challenging idea, although taking into account that at least in Finland, in the current Finnish healthcare system, and the way of promoting health and treating ailments is a bit different. It doesn't fit very well to our health policy issues. Some reflections of that. And the third, I have third thing to. Well, okay, let's go. I come later on the third one. Let's discuss.
But it would be nice three, because we speak about triumvirate, three modules, three aspects of selfhood, three comments. It would be everything very congruent.
Like Alexander
But about the first comment, indeed, neurophenomenological studies, it is the approach is not a mainstream, but it is gaining popularity and importance, because neuroscience before was very reductionistic. So we tried to reduce everything to neurophysiological, and not in a clever way. And this understanding brought the idea that if we deal in and want to actually understand the subjectivity, we could not ignore it. And unfortunately, there is no other way for us to dig into look into the human subjectivity, but ask people to describe what they're feeling. Of course, there is a risk here that what they're describing might be a confabulation, so they afterwards post hoc kind of try to give explanation which maybe they not even experience. We also do not know exactly which part of the time they experience it, especially if there is profound changes, like for example when they feel completely nothingness and nothing else. What is it? Is it in the most beginning? Or maybe it is in the most end, when they just come out, and because they remember, well, it's so close, not the whole part. There is this problem. But considering all these problems, still, because we try to dig in every of these reports, when they actually provide these reports, what you're now describing, was it really during this phase, or maybe this phase? Try to go back, immerse, try to re-experience again this thing, and then tell. So this called kind of microphenomenological approach. So it shown that it has less problems than you simply ask to describe what was like during last 1 hour. So this is the first comment. The second comment, indeed, not only in Finland, everywhere we have problem with healthcare system. And not only related to this research, generally, I would call it sick care system, because this system does not care about health. If you call and tell that, I feel that my strength is not very strong, go home. Why are you calling? Only when you practically die, and then the system works very nicely. But
yes, and in very serious health.
yes, then it's worked perfectly, especially in Finland.
I fully agree.
But all these nuances, they are not taken into account. But research shows that, recent research, that psychedelics indeed have profound positive effects on the anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and conscious connected breathing also. There are studies, clinical studies, where they took patients and then show that this breathwork actually improves symptoms. Another story, how durable these effects are, how long they will last. Because we, of course, clinically, if I'm a health policymaker, of course I am interested, not that like after this procedure, maybe 5-10 minutes, person feels okay, but next day it's again everything back. This is not therapy. So this yet need to be studied. So we don't know yet, but at least we know that these immediate effects, positive effects, they are present.
Thank you. Yeah. Second question, please. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation that goes way beyond my professional and educational and experiential framework. I'm total layman on this area, of course. So I would like to ask, remembering this background, that are you really telling us that you can introduce similar kind of experience that drugs are introducing by using the CCB? That's the point. Okay?
Yeah.
And if so, have you done this kind of research in many countries, in Finland or other countries? And has it been easier or more difficult to conduct such a research here in Finland?
Okay. This research was done in Finland.
Okay.
With Finnish instructors who are experts in this particular breathing and some other breathing techniques. So they were guiding every participant. So this was the problem of this experiment, that we could not put 10 people or 20 people and put EEG helmet on all of them. That would be extremely expensive. So we need to do it one by one, and it's 1 hour per person. So it took a lot of time because we could not compress it. But there are few other groups working in different countries with conscious connected breathing, and some of them are using MRI. It's a magnetic resonance imaging technique, and some of them, I think maybe one used EEG, but they do not have any model related to self-consciousness. They were just interested how brain activity in general changes during conscious connected breathing.
My third question was, have you any connections to Finnish social work or healthcare authorities? I mean, have you been telling about this your research to the Finnish authorities?
No, but I hope that our collaborators who are kind of directly guiding the briefing session and making these sessions, so I think they should be more interested in this practical implementation, because we as scientists more interested in the understanding the phenomenon, in the researching it, in the cognizing. But practical implementation, it's for our collaborators who are practically working in this field here in Finland.
Yeah, third question, please.
Can you tell more about what the subjects are doing during the experiment? Do they practice some same yoga breathing method, or do they have different methods?
They don't practice any yoga. They are guided with the same instructions by one of the guides, and the protocol is identical for everyone. So then there is these phases through which they guided. So they need to breathe in a particular rhythm, and if they slip away from this rhythm, then the guide gently help person to go back to the rhythm. And another guide sitting with the chronometer and because they work with the same technique already many years, so they know and see very subtle changes in the body, and they can register. So he is with timing and registering everything what is going on. So we had additional data which are not presented here, but it's additional stream of the data. What was curious that even though subjects, because when you look at them, they laying all the time, and just for me, when I look at them, it looks like they're doing awfully difficult job, because some movements happening, they may cry, laugh, all sorts of things. But in the end, they were very happy, all of them, and they told that they feel elevated and kind of loving kindness to everyone and everything. Quite similar, actually, what we hear from people who used psychedelic substances. This emotional openness and a feeling of connection with everything and everyone and love was really a dominant part afterwards, after session finished. They all report this. And this was really amazing to see.
Exactly.
Yes, my third question is almost the same as your third question. Actually, I was also wondering how these instructions went on. So do I understand it correctly that the people were laying down in 1 hour, and the instructor starts that breathe now with this and that rhythm, and then after 5 or 10 minutes the instructor guide again tells something that how to breathe if the person doesn't breathe exactly how they instructed. Another part of 3B question is that isn't it 1 hour a little bit long thing to do? Because I know the method of going to the mystical state of consciousness. There's shamanic techniques, drumming, music, different kinds of techniques, and usually the altered state of consciousness the duration of the period is around 20 minutes, usually not more, because it's requires a lot of energy to get that state. And therefore, I wonder whether 1 hour is a bit long period for the patient or
it is longish, and this is why we were actually interested in this particular technique. It's always about this time, because we want to have long altered state to see the dynamics. We were not interested in short ones, because we already had data for short ones. For example, it is longish, but not longest, because, for example, there are breathing techniques which are like 3-4 hours. So, but this is kind of suit our purpose.
And we did not enforce this timing. This timing comes from the technique itself. This is usually how it takes for the conscious connecting breathing. They need to have those 4 phases. Every phase has particular duration, and the guide usually guides that person how to breathe and when to change in order to get to new phase.
I did not tell this during the talk that actually all subjects, they were experienced breathers. It was not their first time. They were not naive to the technique. And this was a requirement of the for the ethical approval, because some of the sensation during the process might be unpleasant, like cramps or tensions. Some of them cry because they experience something emotionally tense. And we were kindly asked to recruit those who already experience, so they know what to expect. So it will be more, otherwise person may be scared. So they all knew the technique, they experienced. So the guide only help in case they start slipping from the technique during the process, because for us important that they stay on track all the time.
Yeah, that's clarified. Clearly, thank you.
Tässä on kaksi kysymystä. Vissi tämmöiset ensin ja sitten sinä.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering that was the crew, did you know their background, if they were like meditators? So did you know the tradition, what they are practicing? Because I think it's quite central, these topics of I and self in many traditions, which are like practicing meditation.
That was not the interest of for this study, because for us actually it was not important. There could be this one of the critical points that, for example, the group was not homogeneous in this respect, that some of them were in a particular tradition, and this tradition would help them reach better result or reach complete mystical experience than the other tradition. For us it was not important at all, because it does not matter for this study what helped them or does not help them to achieve. For us only was important that if the state was achieved, we want to see the neurophysiological part, what is happening in the brain during those changes, how they describe them subjectively. If something helped them or not, it was not important. This is why we were not focusing on this part. But because, of course, we communicate with them, we know that some of them practicing some meditation techniques and some yoga. They were, because generally they were interested in this kind of field.
I'll have a connecting question later, but I'll first thank you for the presentation, and I'm interested, did you define the mystical experience, or did the participants get to define it themselves? And how does that differ from the ineffable experience?
We did not define it, neither they define it. We only use the mystical experience questionnaire, standardized. Why it is standardized? Because it is accepted in the scientific community to use it, because it quite nicely characterizes the mystical experience. If you reply on those questionnaires and then calculate the scores, you will get the value. If it's very high or low, or in between, and then have these cutoffs, which tells you if it's complete or partial or no mystical experience at all. So we make our conclusion only based on these results of this questionnaire, not based on any definition of mystical experience. But you see that one of the dimensions in this questionnaire, it is about that ineffability. So this, of course, increases. You saw that it was higher than in the resting wakefulness state all the time. And also was higher during complete mystical experience than during the partial mystical experience. So our conclusions were based only on this questionnaire.
All right, so it had like many, like the scale you had there with the different categories, they were all parts of the mystical experience, or? They are
considered to be part of characterizing a mystical experience.
Okay.
Because like all our experiences, they are complex. It's like nested hierarchy. On the top you have mystical experience, but underneath there are so many different components. The same like with selfhood. Selfhood is like gestalt, But underneath, we define or choose these three components because they are the most prominent during different states. But every of those components contains their own structure. It's like nested hierarchy.
We have less than 5 minutes to get out of the room.
Okay.
Okay.
Then I don't keep pressing it.
Just a quick question. Is that technique is like universal, or can I find it in somewhere, that specific technique about breathing?
Conscious connected breathing, it is quite known, yes. It's actually was operationalized as a part of the new wave in United States. I think it was, I could not tell exactly the name of the person, but later it was taken into the scientific studies, and it is quite used. So if you write anywhere in Google or artificial intelligence conscious connected breathing, you will immediately get data. And if you are interested here, then you need to contact these two people because they have their school, their husband and wife. This is the organization, Breathwork Finland. Okay, but thank you very much. Kiitos paljon.
Thank you also, Karja Kallio-Tamminen, who organized this connection and presented this theme for tonight. And let's give some applause.
Thank you.